So let's now open Pro Tools. The version I'm using currently is 12.5.2. So what tends to happen is it will rescan all your plugins, and it will take a little longer because it's not storing this in the preferences. So it's just going through all the plugins which we have at the moment on this computer. Right, so once Pro Tools opens, as you can see, you'll have no recent list or anything, so it's important to open something. So I'm just going to open from disk and choose something which we want to work on. Right. So initially it will take some time for stuff to open up, but remember that you just have to do this once, and basically your Pro Tools is now as good as new when you first got it. There are a few challenges though. The first thing you'll do when you hit play is it may be playing, and the master may be open, but you won't hear anything. That's where you need to go to setup Playback Engine and check your Playback Engine. It should be the sound card which you're using. So in this case it's a Zen Studio. Hit yes, and then it loads it back. And I wouldn't tick this if I were you. Ignore errors during playback. Errors are very important, and that could probably ruin your recording. So I would leave that unticked. Hardware buffer size, in this case 1024, as we are mixing. And once you hit OK, it opens and it should play from your existing sound card without much of a problem. Right, so now that Pro Tools is opened, there are a few things you may want to set up. One thing which I recommend is to set up the recording to be in quick punch mode, which can be done by hitting 6 on the numeric keypad. So that allows you to record on the fly, and even if you forget to record on the fly, it stores whatever you'd fail to record in the RAM or in the memory before you actually hit record. So that's a useful thing to turn on. It can definitely save your recording in some cases. What I would also do is turn on loop playback, which is Command Shift L or Control Shift L if you're a PC user. So if I play this back, and now if I play a loop or if I select a portion, it automatically loops that selection, which is a very useful thing in my opinion. So you could consider record record mode to be quick punch, and play mode to be loop play, which is Command Shift L. Another thing which I like to do with the zoomer tool, if it is on a normal mode, is to turn it to single zoom mode. So what that allows you to do is whenever you perform a zoom operation, like let's say something right now, it goes back to the previously used tool, which in this case is the smart tool, which can trim, which can select, and which can grab items or regions. So now if I want to further zoom in on this, I hit F5, go in there, and now I can do something else, like make a selection. While the normal zoom, on the other hand, which I guess is default, will do one level of zoom, and then it just assumes that you're only going to zoom or zoom out by holding the alt key. Now if you're a user for a while on Pro Tools, I'm sure you'll agree that you will be able to make a level of zoom to be quite accurate if you use it just once. Like if I want to go to this note, or this word, it's quite easy to do it. You just have to select it and then go out if need be. So uh, that's the zoom tool I would generally prefer. Coming to colors, now the default coloring of Pro Tools is such that you just see the color on the track nameplate here and then on top. For me personally, I'd like to see the entire track colored, or at least have the ability to control the same. So all you have to do is double click on any color icon you see here. The color palette opens up, and what you could do is you could hit this button, which adds the entire color to the track, to the entire channel strip, I would say. So if I turn it off, the color is only here. If I turn it on, the color goes to the entire track. So that's a useful feature, and you can adjust the saturation or the brightness. I don't think I would leave it this bright. Sorry if this annoyed you. And I prefer it all the way down, and saturation could make the color a lot more prominent, as you can see, and lesser saturation, of course, well, this is no saturation, so I would prefer maybe somewhere around here. Again, this is really up to you. It's up to your workflow as well, so feel free to use it as you will and have a setting which works for you. So moving on, there are also preferences in Pro Tools which you need to access and set up the way you want. So you go to Setup menu, then go to Preferences, and I'm going to just go from Display all the way to the right. And these are a few things you will definitely need to do. One is Tooltips. If you're a user who's quite clear with most of the features of Pro Tools, and most of the things you see and most of the knobs you click on, I would recommend to turn off the tooltips unless you really need it. Tooltips are basically, if I turn it on, anything you go to, it tells you the name of the tool. Now, that may work really well if you're a beginner, but I wouldn't recommend it if you already use Pro Tools for a while. So you can turn off the tooltips. It may also save your computer's processing for and free it from something which you may not really need it to do. Organize plugin menus. So I'm sure a lot of you use a lot of virtual instruments and effects and EQs and compressors, and a lot of what you use may not be uh, in within the host or within the application. You'll be using a lot of third-party stuff like Sonox or Native Instruments and so on. So it's important to organize your plugins by category and manufacturer. Native Instruments, for example, is the manufacturer, and it's nice to have the ability to see their plugins, and I would do that. And if I go back here to my mixer, and if I were to put a new insert, there you see it. I have the category of the plugin, which is EQ, dynamics, etc., and I have the manufacturer of the plugin. So it's very easy for me to find my way around stuff. Moving back to the next preference, I would go to operation next, which is to the right of display. And a very, very important thing for me is auto backup. Now, currently it's set to keep the 10 most recent session backups and backup every 5 minutes. That for me definitely doesn't cut it. So, I would go with a backup of every 2 minutes and keep the 30 most recent session backups. Again, this is as per your choice, as per what you are trying to achieve. The other thing which I like to tick is automatically create new playlists when loop recording. So whenever you're recording in a loop, you want there to be a control later so you can comp takes better. So playlists are a great way to do so in Pro Tools. In fact, if any of you are interested to learn playlists, you could send me a comment and we can do a separate segment on how to use playlists. So this is something I would definitely tick. And moving on to editing, I would probably play around with this zoom toggle. Let me first show you what zoom toggle can do. It's this little button over here. So what happens is if I were to use it, let's say go to a point and hit zoom toggle, which actually is the E key. Something happens. It appears very random at times. In fact, it appears to be making something bigger or smaller. It's difficult to say. So it's important for us to plan out exactly what the zoom toggle uh, the zoom toggle function will actually do. So good way to do that is go to setup, preferences, and you can hit zoom toggle follows edit selection, and you can do the track height to probably be large. I don't like fit to window. It makes things too big. I would say the track height could be large or jumbo if you wish. And you could also remove range selection after zooming in, I guess, which may be useful. I'm going to tick it off. So that's about zoom toggle. So what happens now is if I were to hit the E key, it fills up the screen. It only gives me the edit selection within that zoom, and the screen doesn't become super large. It allows me to see other stuff as well. So zoom toggle is also what they call an explode function, and the shortcut as I am demonstrating right now is the E key. My suggestion is to always use zoom toggle for a selection. So if I'm doing it on a lead vocal region here, it makes great sense because now you can go right in and do your editing, and once you're done you can explode out and then it goes back to default. Moving on to more preferences, under mixing, if there's this EQ which you really like, which is your go-to EQ, whether it's the default 7 band which comes with Pro Tools, or whether it's something you've purchased separately like what I've done, the Oxford EQ, uh, it's good to have that as your default, and I'll show you why. And also default dynamics, I prefer to have VMR or virtual mix rack by Slate Digital, so it allows me to access that plugin really quick. Apart from that, I don't really do much here in the mixing tab. And now heading over to processing, I would definitely suggest that you tick this automatically copy files on import. So if your friend or your producer or anyone gives you a pen drive with files and you import that into Pro Tools and then you give him back the pen drive, if this is not ticked, then what's going to happen is you will lose all those files once the pen drive leaves your studio. So if you hit automatically copy files, what it will do is make a copy within your session folder, and you always have those files with you. So it's a very helpful thing to turn on and off. Um, but use it as you will, because there could be cases where you're working, let's say with live sound footage. It may be 3 or 4 hours long, and you don't really have the space to copy those files back into your session. You want to reference it and so on, so you may want to tick it or untick it, but I guess 99% of the time you'd want it ticked. Moving on to MIDI. With MIDI, there are a few things here which I like to always stick. One thing for sure is to remove range selection after opening the MIDI or score editor. So I don't want to have the range given here. I want to make my own range. So I would remove that. You could also use MIDI to tap the tempo of a song, which is a very useful feature. So any connected MIDI device can actually tap the tempo for you. I'm just going to leave it unticked for now, because if you keep playing something, you don't want things to mess up too much. So another thing you could do is use the F11 key for wait for note. I would see no reason why you would not want that. And automatically create click track in new sessions if it isn't ticked already. And finally, the default through instrument. What this basically means is, what is the default MIDI or the default virtual instrument you're going to hear the sound from. And you can choose it to be an effect. My best way of doing it is to just follow what you click. So follows first selected MIDI track means anything you select, and if it has sound, that's the sound you're going to hear. And I think that's a great feature in Pro Tools, which is unfortunately not the default. So that's basically it with preferences. Moving on to I/O setup. So for the I/O setup, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open another session before I import data, and just show you what I should do to the I/O before I work afresh. Either work on a mix fresh or work on a recording session freshly. So I'm going to open another project which we are about to work on and demonstrate this. Right, so I'm just going to make a new session now, and this is another preference you'd need to check if you're a new user. Pro Tools 12 wants you to sign in because of their collaboration features. Unfortunately, I don't have anyone to collaborate with right now. Neither am I going to do it in the near future. So I would like it to always be under session local. This is how Pro Tools was when I first got it. So make sure it's on that. And now you make the name of your project. I call it PT Opus Live Concert. And that's about it. You choose your sample rate and your bit depth, the location for the project. So what I like to do when I work on these, work on a new song or work on a new project, is do a bit of I/O defaulting. So I go to setup, hit I/O, and you see all these buses here. All these buses were from the Sorry about that. All these buses were from the earlier session I worked on, probably. So I don't really want to take chances. What I like doing is just clear all the possible I/O. So select all, go to input, select all, delete, go to output, select all, delete, go to buses, select all, and delete. So if I go back to input now and hit default, it comes back to exactly what I uh, what my audio interface is capable of driving. Similarly, default my output, and finally default the buses. So it gives me 24 default buses, and as a mix engineer, what I normally do is I name some of them. One bus I definitely like to name is mix bus. I'm sure I'm going to have a lot of drums, some reverb, and some guitars. So you get the idea. So now what happens is all of these buses will show up as you make your tracks and as you mix. And if someone else were to have given you their Pro Tools session, you would be working with their bus settings or their outputs or their inputs. You just want to take it back to your environment. So this can be quite helpful. So another thing I like to do in the I/O setup is to alter the default output bus. So the default output bus is currently going out to my speakers, which is 1 and 2. I do not want that to be the case because I usually send all my tracks to the mix bus. So I would change the default output bus to not a physical output but to the mix bus. And that's a bus we have here, and there are unlimited buses in Pro Tools. I urge you to use them. It can definitely make your workflow a lot quicker. And that's basically it. Another thing you could do is check if your peripherals are connected. I currently have an iPad which is launching, which uses the Ucon control, and the moment I open my app, this shows up. But you also want to enable Ucon, or if you're using any kind of Ethernet based controller, you need to enable it under this section. Or if there is a MIDI controller which is doing some stuff in Pro Tools, you need to go to MIDI controllers or Ethernet controllers. In this case, I'm basically controlling everything in Pro Tools with an iPad. So I enable Ucon and hit OK. So that's just something you may want to do at some point. So you see this track highlight, and you can basically modify it as you please. And at the moment I'm using my iPad to control the volume level. So that's just something which is useful to know if you're controlling Pro Tools from an external device like an iPad. There's something I usually tick off under options, which is called pre-fader metering. Now, whenever you're mixing or recording or doing anything, I would recommend doing it post-fader metering. So, let me just open another session to show you what this means, because it may seem unclear in a project which has pretty much nothing. If I were to go to any kind of metering, let's say the drums right now, and if I turn on pre-fader metering, the problem with this information is it's showing me the metering level without the fader of the track being useful. So if whether I make that loud or even zero, it doesn't really matter because we are on pre-fader metering. So I would recommend, if you're recording or mixing or editing or doing anything, to turn that off. So that's options, pre-fader metering, and now you hear when the sound of the kick is off, you don't have a meter showing it, which I think can be quite useful because it appears to be more logical that way. So again, this is Jason here from the Nathaniel School of Music. If any of you have any questions regarding whatever we did now, Do post a comment, and if any of you want me to cover something else and something new, again do post a comment and we will try and get that done for you. Cheers.